Chapter 2, Civilization in Crisis. As a member of the World Future Society, we work quite closely with many organizations monitoring trends and forecasts and studying the future. One of those groups is NASA, and in March of last year, the NASA-funded report was reported in first the National Post, which read, "The utter collapse of human civilization will be difficult to avoid," NASA-funded study says. This was also carried by the London Guardian, and it read, "NASA-funded study, industrial civilization headed for irreversible collapse." Here, with a fuller report, is the RT Network from Washington, outlining what this study had to say. Let's have a listen.
Well, we've long heard about the potential for a collapse of civilization. It's a far-off notion that most of us shrug off as something that could never be seen within our lifetime. And that's why it's hard to believe that this societal breakdown could be closer than we think. According to a new study out by NASA and soon to be published, modern civilization is heading for collapse within a matter of decades. In the study, mathematicians use theoretical models to predict what will happen to the industrialized world over the course of the next century or so. And they found that even with conservative estimates, the Earth is headed down a very tumultuous path. So how was this determined? Well, scientists took a look at a human nature dynamics of past cases of collapse using indicators like population, climate, water, agriculture, and energy. And what they found is that these factors can lead to a collapse by converging to create two different problems. The first has to do with a stretching of resources that puts significant strain on our ecological system. But the second is perhaps more interesting. It involves the economic stratification of society into elites and masses, or simply put, the rich and poor. Earlier, I spoke with population biologist Paul Ehrlich, and he says a collapse could be caused by our increasingly unequal wealth distribution. Take a look.
One is, of course, people on the short end of the stick live in misery. When people say, oh, well, hunger's not really a problem. We have almost 1 billion people that are hungry, another 2 billion out of 7.2 billion that are micronutrient malnourished. And as the system we have now of taking from the poor and giving to the rich carries on, that's going to get worse.
But perhaps what makes us most vulnerable is knowing that what we're seeing isn't exactly new. The study takes a considerable look at the data that shows how the process of rise and collapse is actually a recurrent cycle found throughout history. The study points to the fall of dynasties like the Roman Empire as testimony to the fact that advanced, sophisticated, complex, and creative civilizations can be both fragile and impermanent. But before we all steer down the path of pessimism, there is some good news. We can still do something about it. Scientists say the worst-case scenarios are by no means inevitable and that the trend is reversible. But to do so, we have to begin by putting new social policies in place. For example, Ehrlich tells me that giving women equal opportunities could significantly help population issues.
If we give women everywhere full rights and equal opportunities to men, that will begin to get the total fertility rate down to a point, hopefully, where the population will begin to shrink, because we know that we can't support with anything like foreseeable technologies more than 1.5 or 2 billion people, more or less permanently, on this planet.
Ultimately, to avoid collapse, the study says we need to dramatically reduce economic inequality and resource consumption, perhaps providing a wake-up call that business as usual can no longer be sustained. In Washington, Amira David, RT.
Yes, questions. That's why we're here. That's the purpose of this presentation. By the end of this presentation, you will know the future of Western civilization. This handy report is available at www.godsgumshoe.org, and it's listed at the end of this presentation in the source material and credits. It's an independent study by university researchers utilizing research tools that were developed for a separate NASA activity. The work was partially funded by the NASA GSFC grant And as in the case of independent research, the views and conclusions in these papers are those of the authors alone. But one thing this study points out is this: those who do not remember their history are doomed to repeat it. As this study points out, collapses of advanced civilizations have occurred many times in the past 5,000 years, and they are frequently followed by centuries of population and cultural decline and economic regression that leads to horrible times like the Dark Ages that followed the Roman Empire. If our Western civilization were to collapse, we would enter into a long period of Dark Ages that would make what we call the Dark Ages look like a picnic, because our barbarians are armed and dangerous. For centuries, humanity has largely been reactive rather than proactive, focusing on the present and the immediate future, responding to the problems that are immediately in front of them, and providing only what is then presently required. We saw this in the 2008 economic recession, depression. Now, for the first time in history, humanity is confronted with potential events that are global in scope and too disastrous to let happen. Here, following along that same theme, Dr. Jared Diamond, he's an American scientist and a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, best known for his popular science book called Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. This was made into a huge, successful series in which he spans the globe as well as many ages of our human civilizations. And he sounds the alarm about each of our previous civilizations and how they encountered complex problems which reinforced one another and led to disaster and then eventually became catastrophic. He provides a salutary salute from history that current and future generations would do well to heed. To understand the common causes of society failure, he emphasizes the relevance of understanding their demise in the light of our current problems. This book is a wake-up call for the world, and here is a brief clip summarizing much of what he has to say. Let's have a listen.
200 years from now, if our worst fears are realized, our world could look like this. Great cities lie abandoned. Incredible feats of engineering left to ruin.
There's a real possibility that first world civilization as we know it is going to decline or collapse within the next several decades. It all depends upon the decisions that we make.
It may seem impossible, but many experts agree our modern industrialized civilization could fall apart.
A collapse today would be the greatest disaster in human history. The overall society would simplify. Probably many of us would go back to an agrarian way of life. We would lose everything to which we have become accustomed.
Many of the most advanced societies of the past ended up in ruins, although at the height of the Roman Empire or the height of Maya civilization, it would have seemed equally absurd that those great societies could ever collapse. Well, they did, and we could. It's a matter of life or death for us to understand why these past societies succeeded or failed.
Pulitzer Prize-winning author and scientist, Dr. Jared Diamond, believes we have arrived at a critical juncture in history. We're faced with a choice: to fail or succeed. Unlike the fallen civilizations before us, we can learn from the mistakes of the past and ensure our survival. In these clifftops of Mesa Verde, Colorado, Diamond investigates what became of the Anasazi, the ancestral Pueblo people.
Looking at these ruins, the first big question for me is, why did they end up collapsing? Why did they put all this work into constructing this remarkable site and then abandon it? I have to wonder, are we going to make the same sort of mistakes that these people made and end up abandoning our own cities that archaeologists in the future will look at and say, oh, what beautiful ruins, where did they go wrong?
So it's very important for us to understand that that must not happen. The lesson is clear. Those societies that can adapt to the new complexities of cultural life and the changes that are taking place in this newly emerging environment last and go on to be the foundation for the new civilization. Complexification leads to adaptation. Adaptation leads to emergence, something more from something less. The Urantia Book in paper 99 tells us mechanical inventions and the dissemination of knowledge are modifying civilization. Well, we know that for sure. Certain economic adjustments and social changes are imperative if cultural disaster is to be avoided. This new and oncoming social order will not settle down complacently for a millennium. The human race must become reconciled to a procession of changes, adjustments, and readjustments. Mankind is on the march towards a new and unrevealed planetary destiny. Complexity leads to adaptation, leads to emergence, leads to something new from something old, something more from something less. So what is it then? Sleepwalkers. Civilizations are ended by sleepwalkers, acting out the nightmare until the very end, asleep in their own cocoons of their own making, their own silos of reality that we call a worldview. It should be like this, it should be like that. Unable or unwilling to look out of their cocoon beyond anything to search for solutions. Most people in our world today think more about what they are going to have for dinner than what will happen if the society collapses around them, even though it's happening in the streets all around them. Mostly because we feel helpless. There is an epidemic of anger, an epidemic of distrust. It's an epidemic of fear, and it brings with it an epidemic of despair, depression, and desperation. We all know desperate people do desperate things. We have all been, or we know people who have been there, made bad decisions, listened to bad advice, and ended up in worse situations. Most people think it's just those damn rich people or those damn rich nations that are the problem here on our planet. And there might be something to that. A quote from the Urantia Book says this: "Today, luxury vies with necessity in occupying the center of the stage of human activities. Such an age is all too often characterized by tyranny, intolerance, gluttony, and drunkenness." Sound familiar? The weaker elements of the population incline towards excesses and brutality. But today, society is top-heavy with the overgrowth of supposed human needs. Our civilization groans wearily under the tremendous overload of luxury and the inordinate multiplication of human desires and longings. Modern society is enduring the strain of one of the most dangerous phases of far-flung interassociation and highly complicated interdependence. Thus, does the whole social body push on slowly toward the goal of destiny, extinction or survival, depending on whether that goal is self-maintenance or self-gratification, selfishness. Self-maintenance originates society, while excessive self-gratification destroys civilization. We'll come back to self-gratification a little bit later in these presentations. But we all know that there's a fire in the madhouse, and no one knows how to put it out. But for God's sakes, don't pull the fire alarm. It only wakes the inmates, agitates them, and exacerbates the problem. Their intentions are good, well-meaning in most cases, but as we have seen in many of the elaborate protest movements, they may be able to get into the gates, but their fire hoses have no water. And they don't know how to put out the fire either. They don't have a plan, except to tear the top down. But this is not about tearing the top down. It's about building the bottom up. The system is not the enemy. The government, our leadership, is not the enemy. And neither are the police, the military, or our first responders. Our enemy is chaos, anarchy, a Mad Max situation where only the bullies can win. But as people like John Lennon said, we'd all like to start a revolution, but show us the plan. There isn't one. We need to understand that the system that we're standing on is the foundation for the new system, the new civilization. Now, sure, in a purely material world, if you want to build a new house and the old foundation is rotten, then you tear it down. But in an organic world, a rotten foundation is called compost. And new seeds grow best in compost. We can all see, just as in Rome, the barbarians are at the gate. And we need a wake-up call, but not a fire alarm. What we need is a reality check. We need a wisdom alarm. Today, our world is full of sleepwalkers walking through this difficult transition from one age to another. But what is needed now is a better idea than the ones we've been using. We need a bigger idea. We are spending huge amounts of time and energy on what is breaking down. But the new civilization is already here. It's not about what's breaking down, it's about what's breaking through. Now we're going to call on a number of experts in this area and see what they've got to say. One of these is called the Urantia Book. But it's not like any alarm clock that we've ever heard before. It's not for everyone. And there have been plenty of alarm clocks before. But this is more like the kind of the bright morning sun that shines into your window and wakes you slowly with a gentle kiss of light that says, "Good morning," wakens you to a new world. Welcome to a new day, a new age, a new civilization. As a futurist, we can see it coming. But it's not the breakdown that's so important. It's what is breaking through. There's a rapidly growing awareness that these are unique times. That global trends now in place will collide in the near future, producing extreme uncertainty for humanity. Unless we quickly learn how to scan the horizon, see problems holistically, and from a cultural perspective, choose the future that we want and move quickly in that direction. What is required is directed human cultural evolution, moving us to a new level of awareness, to a new set of values. The only way to assure that these catastrophes do not transpire is to become different people with different tools. We must transform our society. We must see ourselves and the world around us as fundamentally different. We must see it in new ways, and then approach our task with new, less intrusive tools. That is why we're using this collection of 196 papers called the Urantia Papers, put together in the Urantia Book, an international bestseller which is now translated into 14 languages with more on the way, and reported to be the highest human thoughts ever thunk on our planet. We're using this to help investigate this crisis situation to our world and to seek for solutions. In this presentation, we're not going to dwell on the challenges that we face. There are many, and there have been many who have come forward and have told us about these. But here in these presentations, we want to focus on solutions. And after reading these papers, I think they are what they claim to be: the solutions to our problems. And hundreds of thousands of other readers all over the world in many other languages and cultures agree. They say the same thing. These papers are the answer. These are what we need. And so when we hear that, we have to think, well, it's at least worth a reading and an investigation. I had the extreme privilege of working with Buckminster Fuller, one of the great scientific, spiritual geniuses of the 20th century. My children would sit on his lap while he would tell us how the universe worked. And he often told us, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
I think it's touch and go, but I think we're going to make it. But don't let up. Don't let up, or we won't make it.
Now, before this presentation is over, you will know our future, and you will know yours. Now you think, okay, well, I'll just jump up to the end and have a look. But that won't work. The reason that won't is because you won't know what this is, nor how it works. And that's what our presentation is about here in Chapter 2, Civilization in Crisis. So join us in Section 2 as we begin to understand how we move from a tapeworm of a system of crime and corruption, of climate change, resource mismanagement, and more importantly, family breakdown, that is rotting the foundation of our system from the inside out, and into the organic cocoon where the caterpillar of transformation can metamorphosize into the new system that we need to make the world work. The next step in our evolution, it's not revolution that we're looking for or what we need, it's solution. And solution comes from evolution. The Urantia Book gives us a clear hint. In paper 81, section 5, we read this: biological evolution and cultural civilization are not necessarily correlated. Organic evolution in any age may proceed unhindered in the very midst of cultural decadence. But when lengthy periods of human history are surveyed, as we're doing now, it will be observed that eventually evolution and cultural become related as cause and effect. Biologic evolution may advance in the absence of culture, but cultural civilization does not flourish without an adequate background of antecedent human racial progression. from paper 81, section 6, entitled The Prevention of Transitional Breakdown, we read this. Society is the offspring of age upon age of trial and error. It is what survived the selective adjustments and readjustments in the successive ages of mankind's age-long rise, from animal to human levels of planetary status. The great danger to any civilization at any one moment is the threat of breakdown during the time of transition from the established methods of the past to those new and better but untried procedures of the future. It's not what's breaking down, it's what's breaking through that is so vitally important for us to understand. So join us. Chapter 2, Section 2, Civilization in Crisis, as we begin to understand what's the next step.
Angel of the darkest night, how did you find me here? Just when I had lost the fight and cried my final tear, I only prayed for peace of mind. You gave me so much more. Angel of the darkest night, you showed me heaven's door. Like a ship tossed on the sea, far from any land, her sails torn by fearful storms and waves to dwarf a man. No chart to plan the journey home, no compass point, no guide. Why must we be so far gone before we see the light? Angel of the darkest night, how did you lead me through despair to let me see the sky again, to let me